Ladies and gentlemen, I've discovered exactly what the most evil drink in the world is, and it's not alcohol, it's tea. Don't believe me? That's fine. I'll prove it to you after a quick word from our sponsors. I mean, I say sponsors, but we're new, so we actually have one. Instead, I'm going to tell you about our favourite charity, Operation Florence. Formed by a lovely bunch of ex and currently serving healthcare and emergency service personnel who see the decline in funding and gaps in capability a real problem, they're working to build a volunteer-based emergency medical rescue and healthcare service that they hope will one day have locations across the country. But to do this, they need funding. I know, it's kind of ironic, isn't it? But there it is. But they're awesome, and we want to help them. So if you can spare £3 once or monthly added to your phone bill, and you can donate by text, or if you prefer, you can even donate by PayPal. You can even donate more than £3 or nothing at all. It's entirely up to you. Details of how you can donate or not, or how to find out more about these amazing people will be pinned in the description below. Now, to the subject at hand. Someone asked me a few weeks ago what I thought the most evil drink in the world is. There was a group of us talking, everyone else started pointing the finger at alcohol in general, or specific types or brands like wine or absinthe. Me, I started thinking, what makes something evil? I'm not talking evil in a biblical sense. That would mean that some outside entity like the devil has influence in it. And well, I don't believe the devil exists. I mean, the word evil didn't even exist until the advent of the Abrahamic religions. I'm talking evil in its truest form, ill intent, control, dominion, causing harm to others solely for your own benefit, that sort of thing. See, for me, absinthe or rum or a pint doesn't really cut it. So I went digging, and here we are. Tea. Tea is the only drink that has done all of those things. I know you're probably thinking that I've lost my mind, but bear with me here. The first time tea crossed the threshold of evil acts was, of course, the British Empire. But trust me, that was only the start of it. Tea is responsible for so much more than an empire that is, in reality, a fairly even existence of good and bad. Allow me to explain. It all started with tea's first introduction to Great Britain. It crossed the border thanks to Portuguese traders around 1657, marketed as an exotic medicinal drink. But it didn't really take off until the marriage between King Charles to the Portuguese princess Catherine of Braganza. She loved her tea and brought it with her to court, making it a very desirable drink. Let's face it, what goes on court, people want to do. What proceeded then was a series of events that would lead to tea really being able to set to work. With the growing desire for tea, a company originating around 1600 took control of all tea imports to Britain in 1664. I am, of course, talking about the East India Company. Now, if you've seen Pirates of the Caribbean film series, you'll know who I'm talking about. Trust me when I say they weren't really exaggerating the East India Company in the movie. Of course, in the movie, they called it the East India Trading Company, but in reality, it's the East India Company. Now, the East India Company formed and began direct imports of tea from China, but it was expensive, meaning that the product was heavily taxed at 119%. Yeah, that also meant that Britain could expand its interests. See where this is going? During this time period, the British Empire started to expand, all in search of tea and territories, making their trade routes work faster and harder. But of course, this also meant that others saw opportunity too. Pirates, which is where we find the evidence that the East India Company was essentially owned by the British Crown. They were essentially the trade arm of the Royal Navy. They shared crews across ships, and yes, the East India Company ships were heavily armed. And unlike other merchant vessels, they wouldn't just defend themselves against pirates, they would actually go hunt them. Yeah. Over the next 80 years or so, the East India Company set to work building an empire based on monopoly of trade. And yes, they were prolific in their use of slaves because, well, people need their tea, right? The levels these guys were going to are shown in the next milestone of this epic. The colonization of India and Bangladesh in 1757. History books tell us that this was done by the British Empire. Technically, yes. But realistically, this was the East India Company. Why? Well, tea. India and Bangladesh also grow tea, right? And I know there's going to be somebody that's going to sit there and they're going to turn around and go, well, I read in an encyclopedia that it was actually, yeah, the British Empire. Yeah, but there was nobody other than the East India Company there. It was East India Company people that did it, right? It was the East India Company that colonized India and Bangladesh. Now, I'm not saying that tea was the only reason for the British Empire, before any historians start giving me hate, but it's the biggest reason I can find. Everything else just seems secondary. Right? Everything seemed to be going well. The only difficulty was that the East India Company was running low on fluid cash. So they, of course, petitioned the king, who made probably the worst decision he could have made. He gave the East India Company sole rights to trade tea to the American colonies. Not only that, but the East India Company were exempt from crown taxes. They were only liable for local tax. At this time, 1773, we are still talking tea tax for the consumer of 119%. With an effective monopoly, the East India Company could charge what the hell they liked. Well, of course, the locals in Boston, the first area to be affected by this change, well, they weren't very happy with this because what it meant was that yeah, other importers were coming in. They're liable for the 119% crown tax. The East India Company isn't, right? So you've got these other traders coming in. They've got this tea. They're liable to pay their crown tax. They're liable to pay the local tax, right? So they're going in. Say they're going in charging £10 a barrel, right? And they're making maybe 50 pence profit. The East India Company could go in at £8.50 a barrel and make £7 profit. They dominated. They had the monopoly. So the locals in Boston, they weren't very happy with this. So they hatched a plan and undertook an operation of rebellion that is now known as the Boston Tea Party. The Boston Tea Party. The very same one. Executed by a group called the Sons of Liberty. What they did was to dress as Native Americans, sneak onto 3 ships over the course of a month, being the Dartmouth, the Beaver, and the Eleanor, and dump a total of 92,000 pounds in weight of tea into the harbour, leading to some pretty harsh responses from the British Crown. They effectively shut down all trade to Boston until the tea was paid for, which didn't happen. In actual fact, what did happen was a spark uniting all 13 colonies and starting the American War of Independence. Well done, tea. With the advent of war in the Americas, things started to turn for the East India Company, but they stuck with it. They kept the crown on side and kept pushing forward as much as they could. But over time, the crown began to realise that they had indeed created a monster. Yet still, they had a bit of time before the next catastrophic impact from the crown, probably because they had achieved so much. Their actions had pretty much created a strong empire and a strong royal navy. Of course, there were other facets to it before anyone was shouting, but really, they were by far the biggest player. They themselves colonised a few countries on their own. The next impact from the crown was in 1807, with a ban on slaves being used or traded anywhere in the British Empire. This is a massive impact for the East India Company, and of course, tea. The company was a vehicle for its dominance, but they considered themselves pretty safe. That was until the Royal Navy formed the West Africa Squadron in 1808 to force the ban. What preceded was a period of black market trading and bribery, which of course became very costly. Realizing that the East India Company was running out of liquid cash and power, the Chinese tea traders decided to further turn the screws on the EIC by demanding that they no longer pay in cash or promises thereof. They wanted silver. Seems fair enough. Silver, of course, wasn't cheap, and this presented a problem. Tea had to have its way, though. So the East India Company looked at what it had and what they could do with it, and, well, they started smuggling opium. The stuff that's used to make heroin. Yeah, the East India Company became the world's first drug cartel. Eh, I mean, do you understand the gravity of what I'm saying here? Drug cartels had never existed until this point. Maybe locally in some places, but never on a scale like this. They literally invented it. So much so, a lot of what they did, the methods that they used, are still being used today. And why did they do this? To buy silver to pay for tea. Yeah. Well, this really started the decline for the East India Company. Pretty soon, it would lead to the first of the Opium Wars, eventually leading to the company being stripped of all crown backing and privileges and support, and the eventual dissolution of the company in 1874. But does that make tea evil? Well, here's the thing: tea is clever. It got itself world domination, but it wasn't done. Knowing that it was losing its best friend and domination vehicle in the East India Company, it started looking for other avenues to extend its will, and it found them in individual people. Tea found its way to being the world's leading vehicle for poisoning. Don't believe me? Let me name a few. 1872, Mary Ann Cotton was arrested at 21 known murders by poison in tea, including husbands and children. And that's 21 that they know of. In all the write ups that I've read in doing this research, it clearly states 21 that they know of. Deaths weren't really logged that well back then. They reckon there's more. 1951, Herbert Rose Armstrong murdered his wife using arsenic in tea. 1953, Caroline Girls, aka Aunt Tally, Australian, killed half of her family with poison in tea. 1960s to the 1970s, Graham Frederick Young, aka the tea poisoner, count is literally unknown. They literally have no idea how many cups of tea this guy poisoned. I could keep digging, I could probably keep going, but you get the point. In conclusion, people can argue that I'm wrong, that's fine. You can tell me I'm wrong in the comments if you like, but I am certain beyond any reasonable doubt that tea is the single most evil drink known to man. It created empires, weakened empires, helped create arguably the most influential and powerful country in the world, America. It invented drug cartels and then became the world's favorite drink to carry poison. Who knows how many people have been killed that way or what else it's going to do? This is why tea is banned in my house. Yet there are people that swear by it. It's apparently the drink of Britain. Maybe we should start a petition about that. I have absolutely no idea, but I'm have to go and do that and drink some rum. If you like what we're doing, drop us a like, a share, subscribe. I don't know which is going to be first, the petition or the rum, but this world's just weird.